In this video, we're going to build our first example using Visual C# 2010 Express Edition. And if you're new to programming, almost every tutorial starts off with what's called a Hello World example. And hey, who am I to ignore the tradition of our forefathers in the code? So what I want you to do is follow along and do exactly what I do. We're going to use this tiny example that we're about to create as the basis for several additional discussions today and tomorrow. We'll just dissect every single part about it. Okay, so what I want to do is start off by creating new project. From the start page, I'm going to click new project. And here I'm going to select a C# console application, and I'm going to change the name to day 1. Select it first and then click day 1 and then click OK. Alright, and right here underneath of this curly brace near the static void main, open and close curly brace, I'm going to type a line of code. Console.WriteLine hello world. And then I'm going to use this little triangle button up here that says Start Debugging. I'm going to click that, and you're going to see a little, oh, that's it. Our application ran. A console application displays the Windows console, or rather, some like to think about it, the old DOS prompt. So that's right. To start off, we're going to go old school. Don't worry, we're only starting here, so we're not encumbered by displaying windows and such. We want to keep it simple and talk about the C# language first. All right, so remember to do everything that I did. Follow exactly, rewind, pause the video, do whatever you have to do in order to get that same result. And you'll say, what result? That didn't look like much. That's true. That's because our application ran very briefly and then stopped. We didn't even get a chance to see what was on the screen. So what we're going to do is add one more line of code. Console.readLine. And now we're going to hit that same button again, Start Debugging. Or tell you what, let's do something fun. We'll go up to the debug menu and select Start Debugging, so we can get at it from several places. Oh, and here we go. This is a Windows console window, black background with the white text, unless you made some changes to those options. And we see our message, Hello World, with a little dashing cursor underneath of it. If we hit any key on our keyboard, especially the return button, then our application will exit. Okay, so what does this all mean? What did we do exactly? Well, first of all, we created a new project, and we can see the files that belong to that project over here within our IDE. The IDE stands for Interactive Development Environment. It's the program, in this case, Visual C# 2010 Express Edition, where you type all your code, where you manage all the files that belong to or get compiled into an entire application. And so this little window here shows us the files, particularly this program.cs file that we then saw in this main area here within the IDE, the program.cs file. And this is where we typed in our code. Okay, this properties window, we'll come back to that later. We'll come back to this little thing called toolbox. You can see there are a number of icons here on the toolbar, most notably the save and open and things of that nature. We use this Start Debugging button. So already we're starting to get just mildly familiar with the user interface of the Express Edition tool. So let's start talking about the composition of an application. Notice that I asked you to write the code between these curly braces. If you didn't do that, then you probably got some very unpredictable results. You may have even seen something like this. Let me just highlight that. I'm going to hit the Control X on my keyboard. I'm going to move my mouse cursor down underneath that area and paste the code in here instead. And you can see all of a sudden I'm getting some red squiggly lines that are giving me system console write line is a method, but it's used like a type. And if we were to try to run it, we would get a message that said there were build errors. Would you like to continue? No. And if we clicked no there, we would see this error list pop up. So it's important that you follow along, and at least at first, until you get more familiar with kind of the process here. But essentially what we did was we wrote some code in a very special method. We'll talk about methods later, but a very special area of this application called main. And main by default will be what's executed first whenever our application is run. And the code between these two curly braces, this is called a code block. Any code that's defined between those curly braces is what will get executed whenever our application runs. Now let's do this just for fun. I want to close our application. Let's just close the solution down, and it says, do you want to discard the changes? No, I want to save those. So let's go ahead and save this into our the default location, which will put it in your documents directory on Windows 7. And it'll also create a directory for solution called day one. We'll talk about solutions and projects a little bit later and what their relationship is. Let's just click save, and let's shut down Visual C Sharp. And we're going to go to our documents directory in Windows Explorer just to see where everything's at. We're going to double click on the Visual Studio 2010 folder, and then if we double click on the projects folder, you can see our day one solution folder, and here is what's called a project file, or I'm sorry, a solution file. You can see here under the description of Microsoft Visual Studio Solution. And if we were to go into this day one folder, you can see that there's another day one file, but this time it's a Visual C Sharp project file. Again, let's come back to solutions and projects a little bit later. Here's that program.cs file that we saw earlier. And then if we looked in this bin directory, we would see two folders called debug and release. If we go into the debug folder, you can see that we have something here, day one. I have the extensions hidden by default in Windows 7, but it's day1.exe. exe should trigger your mind in thinking this is an executable file. So this is where at least the debug version, and we'll talk about the difference between debug and release versions a little bit later, but this is where the debug version of the exe file was created whenever we hit start debugging on our application. So what if we wanted to load this back up and work on it a little bit more? There's a couple of different ways we could go about it. We could simply double click this solution file, the Microsoft Visual Studio Solution. We could get wild and even double click this project file. I'd recommend that you open the solution file though for right now. Or we can just jump back into Visual C Sharp 2010 Express Edition, click File, Open Project, and it'll give us the Open Project dialog, and we can kind of drill in and find the project we're looking for. Here's another idea. We can go to the recent project section of the start page, which pops up. And the start page, I'm sorry if I didn't define this earlier, it's just an area where you can kind of a jump off for both your own projects and the community. You can see that Microsoft's posted the Beginning Developer Learning Center where some of our videos are posted. Also the Coding for Fun site where you can see some examples of things that people built with Legos and .NET and neat things of that nature. Some other additional tutorials, and also news from an RSS feed. I'll let you discover those on your own. Pretty straightforward stuff. Let's go ahead and click the recent projects, and you can see when I hover over it, it has this little pin. That's because as you build more projects, this list grows longer and longer, and some will get pushed off and won't be able to be seen anymore on this list. So I could just pin this down, and no matter how many projects I create, this day one project will always pop up to the top of the list. So that's really neat. Let's go ahead and click. And now we're back into our application. Okay, so that's a good starting point. We can build on this. We'll talk more about the structure of C# applications, the structure of console applications, what these code blocks mean. We're going to add more C# language. We'll talk about what this console dot write line with the open parentheses We'll talk about all of that in the next video. So if this doesn't work for you, please make sure you get at least this far before you continue on, so that we can have a discussion kind of on the same page. Alright, so good luck. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you.